Crime, Punishment, and Mental Illness. Law and the Behavioral Sciences in Conflict by Patricia E.Erickson and Stephen K. Erickson. I had it for a while. I got it from a bookcase. Kind of didn't want to open it because I don't know how it would affect me. But did just now, and it's different than I anticipated. I don't know what I was thinking. Maybe perhaps they get into case studies later, which is probably what it was that I wanted to avoid. Or not case studies, whatever they call them. Like specific examples of people's lives in the system. This part was, well, it seems like the whole book is going to be very interesting. There's not food in there. I just took notes inside that bowl. I guess when I opened it up, I started checking out, but the part about this section specifically that I liked was when they're discussing free will, which I think about a lot. One way to think about the socially constructed reality of criminal law is to consider the social meaning that we attach to it as it currently exists in American society. Let me see when this book was written. Patricia E.Erickson, 2008. Okay. As illustrated in Baumhammer, I'm not sure what that is yet. And in other examples that we will describe in forthcoming chapters, criminal law and law generally place great emphasis on the philosophical tradition of moral reasoning as well as on religious ideas concerning good and evil. From these traditions arose the assumption that all people possess free will, and that we could and should understand behavior as an outcome of choices persons make as free agents. Green, 1995, Basilon, 1983. I'm at 83. Basilon, I don't know. In contrast, the behavioral sciences that include psychiatry and psychology are grounded in a deterministic and empirical tradition, and therefore examine the causes or reasons for behavior in terms of a person's social, psychological, and biological history, and in addition in terms of the influence of social structure. Parentheses or whatever. D'Angelo, 1968, Furlong, 1981. Behavioral scientists do not identify free will as a construct that they can measure within the personality of an individual, and consequently the behavioral sciences do not consider it as an explanatory factor of human behavior. The behavioral sciences may examine what factors in the person's background explain their actions or conduct in a given situation. But this is the behavioral sciences may examine what factors in the person's background explain their actions or conduct in a given situation. But this is a very different idea than free will. It made sense the first time I read it. Now that sentence seems even more confusing. The behavioral sciences may examine what factors in the person's background explain their actions or conduct in a given situation. Maybe just the way it's worded, conduct in a given situation, is kind of hard to understand. But this is a very different idea than free will. Responses to the factors in a person's background suggest a great deal. Oh, wait a minute. Might as well look at something cool. Where were we? How did I lose it again? Of course. The behavioral sciences may explain what factors in among content, but this is very different than free will. This is a very different idea than free will. Responses to the factors in a person's background suggest a great deal of variability among people in terms of explaining their actions or conduct in a given situation. Our criminal law tradition recognizes that social, psychological, and biological forces over which an individual may have little or no control may influence the person's behavior. However, the tradition still maintains that persons retain sufficient intentionality or rationality over their behavior, except in extreme situations such as the defense of insanity or in crimes committed by children, to act, quote-unquote, freely. The law's emphasis on free will derives from its historical moral framework regarding how to evaluate whether a person is blameworthy for a criminal act. Generally, the law defines a person as blameworthy through the constructs of mens rea, guilty mind, or actus reus, which is wrongful act. Side note, one of my favorite movies, See No Evil, Hear No Evil, Richard Pryor, freaking Willy Wonka, the real Willy Wonka. A man comes into where the guys are being held in the jail, and he said, "They have the mens rea," and then freaking Willy Wonka starts freaking out, "Mens rea, mens rea," because he thought they said that, like, basically implied that he had a sexually transmitted disease. And he was like freaking out. But now I know. I laughed at the joke in some ways, but I had no idea it was based on mens rea. It's real. Guilty mind. That's what. See, that's like a whole nother thing that in regards to. Never mind, we're not even get into that. Okay, back to the book. Love it. Well, actually, love it, Kevin. He's my little neighbor. He's so cool. We're actually, love you, Kevin. Who knows? One day you might watch this. Love you, Kevin Costner. You're such a fucking badass. I was telling Hilda about how I watched this interview and how he had been interviewed and how a lot of people who are famous, like in regards to like, never mind, I don't mean a lot of people that are famous. Let's just say that sometimes people don't speak out because for whatever reason, of course, it's going to affect their livelihood, or I'm sure every person in their own mind has their own individual. Anyway, once again, I don't know. I haven't thought enough about that to understand. But anyway, what I want to say, love you, Kevin Costner. You're such an freaking awesome dude. And what I especially, other than him just being great before this, he talked about the little kids at the border, the separation, how they're separated from their families. And I think sometimes people have a hard... Oh, never mind. I can no longer speak in generalities, but what he said was... Well, I can if I want, whatever, but... He said, can't you imagine how frightened they must be? Like, how scary it must be for these little kids just completely alone. No mom, no dad, don't know what's going on. They don't understand anything about, like, immigration law. All they know is their world is ripped to pieces, and they're there, and we don't know who's swimming in the waters around them. The predators come where the prey is easy, and anyway, Kevin Costner, you're such a badass. There's only a few more paragraphs, and I really want to get... It's really interesting. I'm going to show a picture of your face, Sammy Davis Jr. Remember, this is whenever you gave me that bear for Christmas? Best Christmas present ever. Okay. Love you, Sammy Davis. Okay. As with the idea of free will, these constructs developed under the English common law through the influence of religious thinking about evil and sin. Today, our system of criminal law retains the concepts of mens rea and actus reus as essential elements of most crimes. Blameworthiness, from a legal point of view, is the concurrence of mens rea and actus reus. More commonly, we say, for example, that a person is guilty of murder if the person killed an individual, actus reus, with malice, aforethought, mens rea. This brings the idea of free will to the forefront because malice indicates intentionality and evilness. The assumption of free will coupled with a moral framework, this is really important to me because I guess anybody who's ever lost their mind before and, like, been considered insane, you're never treated the same afterward, never. But it's okay. It's all part of it all, and I couldn't change it. I mean, there may... Never mind. Anyway, I'm glad. Thank you, the Almighty, for... I don't know. For everything. Okay, back to it. The assumption of free will, coupled with the moral framework embodied in the constructs of mens rea and actus reus, permits us to affix blame in terms of punishment for the crime committed. Legal definitions of insanity such as that applied in the Baumhammer trial specify what would constitute an absence of. And here, whoever had this book last put a cool little star human shape. For whatever reason, this meant something to them. Specify what would constitute an absence of free will. In Baumhammer, the definition of insanity concerned the inability to discern right from wrong because of mental disease or defect. From a behavioral science point of view, the preceding free will analysis is an artificial and outdated one, viewed through a distorted lens because mens rea and actus reus are not factors that are thought to explain behavior. They are religious moral conceptions concerning the nature of good and evil. No comment on this yet, because I still got to think on that one. Behavioral science, and I'm not going to comment on everything, and I mean that one specifically I need to think on. Behavioral science examines the world of empirically observable constructs, known as variables. The purpose of empirical observation in behavioral sciences is to understand and predict behavior. The variables examined by behavioral science present a complex view of human behavior, expressed as theories. Systematic empirical investigation is necessary to decide whether theoretical ideas are valid. That one's really confusing for me. Moreover, the behavioral sciences view mental illnesses as diseases that have biological and psychological causes. In some types of mental disorders, a person's mental state will deteriorate as the disease progresses. The symptoms displayed by a person with mental illness are outward manifestations of a specific illness located within the brain. I really like that term, outward manifestations, because whenever you act different, or the symptoms displayed by a person with mental illness are outward manifestations of a specific illness located within the brain. I'm not going to have time to get to the point that I wanted. And then I'll have to upload this and then delete it before I get to the point. Essential to this theory is the belief that behavior can be changed through mental health interventions, and such treatments are preferable over policies favoring only incapacitation or retribution. Therefore, the principles of behavioral science appear to cut across the powerful forces of punishment in the criminal justice process. Punishment serves to express profound feelings